So I'm Allison Nichols, and formerly from West Virginia University, and currently with University of Connecticut on a temporary assignment. So what we're going to do today is talk about interpreting and utilizing the data once you have it. So what we're going to do today, we're going to use real-time data to identify and select important findings. Lots of findings from data are not important. So what I love about evaluation, I don't know that I said that in the introductions, but what I loved about my job is finding those important findings and creating narratives around them. I found evaluation to be like a puzzle, and I really like puzzles. When I was a kid, I loved to diagram sentences. Probably you're all too young to remember diagramming sentences, because I don't think they do it anymore. But anyway, those kinds of logic and kinds of things always fascinated me, and so I didn't come to evaluation till I was probably 50 or so, and so I didn't know how much I liked it, but I really, really liked that part of it. So I hope I can share that enthusiasm with you. The point of evaluation is to look at the merit of the program and look at how it's presented, evaluate how it should be presented, make changes to it to improve the programming. And then also, we all like to look at the outcomes from evaluation to see if it's creating the change that we expected it to create. When I came to evaluation at West Virginia 19 years ago, we had just gone through a period of evaluation where the only thing that people collected is what is called output data. So how many people came to the program, whether they were boys or girls or whatever. And so it was a new era, and everybody was doing outcome evaluation, and we all used logic models, still do. But the thing is, output data is, I'm going to show you today that output data is also important, and you can use output data to improve your program. So we shouldn't, throw it all away, but we should continue to collect it. It's just not the only thing that we collect or do. And then from that data, we're going to talk about implications. It's the so what question. So that we found this finding, and so what? What does it mean to my program? And then once we decide what the implications are, what are the recommendations? How would you change the program? What would you do? Would you change the program, or would you add a new program, or would you throw it out? Nobody ever wants to throw out programs, especially in extension, and that's part of our problem in extensions. We never get rid of anything. So sometimes a program is worth getting rid of. In West Virginia, we still do these posters. When I came 19 years ago, I thought it was a little old school, but 19 years later, we're still doing posters that kids create. And I think, now all the kids are on the computer and they could be using technology for this stuff, but we're still doing them with markers. So it's that kind of thing. Maybe that's worthwhile doing, but we should be finding out if it is still worthwhile. And then writing impact statements. I am the queen of impact statements because I did the federal report for many years, and that's the way you did the federal report, was to write impact statements. I understand they're going away, and that's good and that's bad, because impact statements are a way to bring all this stuff together and tell your audience what you found out, what your program is doing. And so we're just going to spend a little while on impact statements, taking the findings and the recommendations and everything and turning them into something that your audience can understand. So that's it. That's what we're going to do today. This is the type of data that I have for you today. I have some demographic data for you to work with. I have some end of session, one-time evaluation. We do a lot of that in extension. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mariah, but I think that the common measures that you're doing right now are end of session evaluation, correct? Okay, and so there are ways to use, you can't necessarily show change from the end of session evaluations, but you can certainly show differences in groups and things like that that will enhance your understanding of your data. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. I have some pre and post intervention data, and I also brought a little bit of qualitative data with me today from focus groups or interviews or other kinds of things that you might do. And often the qualitative data can enhance your quantitative data. You could do it before you do your quantitative data to find out what kinds of questions you should ask in the quantitative questionnaires and narrow it down to what you really want to know, or you could do it afterwards to flesh out what you found out from your quantitative data. So I brought a little of that with me too. So we're going to start with demographic data. So I think, is there anybody here who has never collected demographic data on any questionnaire that you've done? Okay. Okay, so everybody has, and we all know what that is. And I know in the common measures and the extension networks, they have really narrowed in on the types of things that they want to collect, and everybody is asking it in the same way, which is great. But then also, you can always include other kinds of questions in either in demographic or descriptive data. I mean, I think that probably all of you have asked questions about why motivation questions. Why did you decide to come to this workshop today? Or what did you like the way the presenter presented? Did you like their audiovisual tools? All those kinds of things. Did you like the location? And so that information can also be used. So in terms of what I have down here is a list of things that you can find out from demographic and descriptive data. And one of them is marketing approaches. I mean, if you ask some questions about why people decided to come today, how they found out about your workshop, those kinds of questions, you might realize that you're not approaching things in the correct way. If you're looking, I know this is mainly a 4-H session here today, but if you were working with older people, you might find out that they don't like to go to things that are in the evening. I used to be in gerontology before I was in extension, and I never quite understood that until today. And at my age today, I understand that driving is harder the lights glare at you more and other kinds of things. So if you found out from your data that you had your workshop starting at 7 o'clock at night and people weren't showing up, you might realize that maybe that's not an appropriate time. So that's the kinds of things that you might find out by collecting some descriptive data. And then you might find out that you have maybe not the correct topics for your workshop. You might find out that you're offering things that everybody already knows, and they would like some other kinds of things, that they would like speakers that are more expert in their field than the ones that you selected, that you're teaching one way that's been done for a long time, and now you have the younger people who want to get their information online. They might want to sit just like some of you are doing today with your computers open and be able to go online and look at things as you teach. There's all kinds of new methodologies and technologies. You all know that probably better than I do. But all those things can be understood and gathered from some of this kind of data. You might, I think most of us, when we ask these questions, ask what other kinds of workshops in this area would you like to attend. I think that's why Mariah and her team decided to offer the things they're offering this year at this workshop, because last year she asked that question and she was told what people wanted to hear about, and so that kind of information can be gathered through demographic and descriptive data. The post-program content-related data, so some of our post-program questionnaires might ask the demographic and the logistic kinds of questions, but then we often have questions that are related to the content itself. In extension, I think a lot of time we ask questions related to, I think, I learned, I increased my knowledge about healthy eating at this workshop. And so we're asking perception questions that the person is asking about themselves. So there's a lot of this data. We can use descriptive statistics to look at it, that 20% of the people said that they learned to pick 5 fruits and vegetables a day in their, for their meals. And that can tell us a little bit about the group. But we might want to look at it more in a comparative way. So if we collect those demographic data and we have categories of people, men, women, boys, girls, older people, younger people, people from different counties, people with different experience level, how many years have you been in 4-H, how many years have you gone to camp, whatever. We can look at that data based upon certain demographic information, and that tells us a whole lot more. I'm going to share one of the pieces of data that I brought today. That's exactly what we did with our camp data, and we found some interesting things with regards to boys and girls that you'll see. I'm not going to give it away, but because it's in the data, but that I brought today. But that becomes really interesting, because then when we get to, we decide to look at that data and we look at the interesting findings and the implications, we can see, well, maybe we should be doing something different for boys than for girls. That maybe we should bring in mentors, maybe, there's various things that you can do. And then when you get into the qualitative data, then you're examining, why is this happening? Because qualitative is about meaning, and we're saying, okay, we know that there's a difference between boys and girls, but why? What is the meaning of this activity to girls that's different from the meaning of the activity for boys? So that's where it becomes really interesting. But when you start to talk about, well, we found these differences and we're going to work with our program to address these differences. Maybe we'll start a new program because of it. Maybe we'll bring in some new activities, a new personnel because of it. Then it gets far more interesting, and people begin to say, hey, yeah, this evaluation is really paying off because programs are changing because of it. And the last thing I had on there was comparative analysis based on benchmarks or national norms. We had a nationally recognized program in West Virginia. We still have it, called Energy Express, which is, although the title won't give this away, but it's a literacy program in the 6 weeks in the summer that uses the concept of print-rich materials. So instead of teaching phonics and things like that, it just brings in all kinds of materials for the kids to learn to raise their literacy level. And then we used, it's called the Woodcock-Johnson test for literacy. We used that to measure year after year how kids maintain their literacy, either increase them or maintain them, hopefully, during those weeks of the summer when they often lose some of those skills, and then the teacher has to come back in the fall and gear them up again. So that was a program that we used. It was actually pre-post data, but we used benchmarks to work with that data. So, and then the pre-post data, which everybody talks about the most. So this is what I have down here is part of a logic model. How many people know or have worked with logic models? Way, we all love them, don't we? Yeah. There's a lot of debate about logic models with an evaluation and whether they're good, bad, or indifferent, but I like them. Because I think that if everybody at least mapped out their program ahead of time into a logic model, they would know where they were headed. Or if the program already exists, they could go backwards. You know that a logic model can be used in 2 different directions. So if you go from left to right, then you're creating a program, and you know what the program is, what you're going to design, and then you determine what the outcomes are. But sometimes I mean, I changed that around. The program already exists. You can see where you are headed. But then the other direction is that you want to increase STEM skills with your program. You start over on the outcome, and then you work left, and you see what kind of program would be a good program that would STEM skills. Because when I first came to Extension, so many people were trying to measure things that were not in the program. So you can't measure STEM skills if there's no STEM skills in the program. So it's an important aspect to really understand what you're doing and where you want to go. And so these three things here are the kinds of things that we can learn from pre-post data. We can learn short-term outcomes, which are learning outcomes. And I like to use this example because I knit some, and so I'm using this knitting example. So if I today taught you to knit, and I taught you to knit the 2 stitches, knit and purl, basic stitches in knitting. I taught you to cast on stitches and knit and purl, and then everybody did a couple of rows before you left today. I would know that you learned the basic skills of knitting and that you could knit 2 or 3 rows on a scarf. Okay, so that's short term. It doesn't have to do with the amount of time I spent with you. It has to do with the proximity to the teaching. So the first thing that I teach you to do is to knit. Now you go home and half of you knit a scarf. Okay, so that's a behavioral change that you learned from my workshop. You didn't do it in the workshop, but you actually changed your behavior. Now you're knitting scarves. Okay, so one of you decided to start up a knitting business in West Hartford and contributed to the arts economy of West Hartford, Connecticut, or wherever you are. That would be a conditional change. Okay, it's not a perfect analogy, but that's the kind of thing often we think that it's harder to measure conditional changes. It's not. It's the easiest thing in the world to go into your knit shop and count one knit shop from my workshop. But the other ones would be maybe even harder and the middle one, we talk about qualitative data. The best way to measure that would be for me to see your scarf. Okay. You could tell me you knitted a scarf, but I have to take your word for it. But if I went or I had you bring them in, that would be the best way. So I don't think we talk enough in Extension about observational data and which is a qualitative methodology, but it's really important. I went to a workshop a long time ago on evocative data, which meant it's a qualitative thing, but it's like if you came into this office here and you walked around and you saw diplomas on the wall, and you'd say, hey, this is an educated group. That would be evocative data, determining by seeing something that something is going on. So that's another form of data. We shouldn't think everything has to be pencil and paper and question and answer. Okay. And so that brings me to the last one, observational data. I have a friend that some of you might know at North Carolina State who does 4-H, Ben Silliman. He does a lot of observational data in 4-H. His camps and everything that he evaluates, he doesn't do the questionnaires. He goes and actually observes how the counselors or workers are interacting with kids. And so that's very labor intensive and often very hard to do and to evaluate, and to analyze, but it's important.
I have a question on that.
Okay.
I completely agree with you. I think we really underutilize observational data, and I think it takes the onus of evaluation off of always being on the people who are receiving services. But I think what I often hear as pushback to observational data is, observer bias. How do we? So is there any place for further exploration around, like, if you have observation protocols, trained evaluators, like, can that mitigate so that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's enough
and
there's the difference of opinion in terms of whether people will stand up apart and observe or actually become a participant and observe. So it's a whole literature. I was involved with the CIFAR project at WVU. I don't know, within that CIFAR project was a evidence-based program called PROSPER, which is a substance abuse program, and PROSPER uses observation for all of their trainings, and they have great tools. Now they're proprietary. Yeah, I don't know whether they'll let you look at them, but they're great tools for observing in the classroom, and that's an important thing. If you're into, I think somebody this morning sounded to me like they wanted to look at their curriculum. So if you want to see if it's being produced with fidelity, it's the same time. Every time it's the same presentation and curriculum. That's the way to do it, would be to observe, and that's why they use it in the PROSPER project. Okay, so I've done a lot of interviews, not so many interviews as I've done focus groups, a lot of focus groups, and that's really important way to gather data. Okay, so what we're going to do right now,
I have a question.
Oh, sure. I'm sorry.
Interviews. Can you comment on one-on-one interviews, or when a participant starts sharing information with you that wasn't in your evaluation form? How you can use that?
You know, most of the time we have structured interviews where we have certain questions, but there are also interviews where you just say, "Tell me about your experience," and you just listen. So it can be done in a number of ways, but my understanding, and you could correct me if it's wrong, that anything that is talked about within that structure can be used. So same way with the focus group. If I could ask a question and people could answer it, and then later up, the same topic comes up in another question, it's fine. All of that information is fair game to use in your analysis. So a key finding. So I gave you some examples. I totally made this up. So just so you know, I said a key finding from some data I was looking at is that 50% of youth say they are not getting the opportunity to practice their STEM skills in their program. And so the implications is, so what? Well, so what if they're not getting a chance to practice? We know that hands-on activity really cements learning. So they may not be gaining the knowledge and skills that we want them to get. So that could be one implication. They might get discouraged because I took a class recently and I got discouraged because the teacher talked so much, and it was a painting class, and we didn't get to paint. So they might get discouraged that they're not doing what they think they want to, or they should be doing in the STEM class, and then and they may lose interest in STEM, and you might lose people that, particularly young women, girls that might have been really good in STEM, but they lose interest, and so they go on to other things. And so I made that up, but these could be some implications from that one finding. And then my recommendations that I also made up is maybe we should assign a mentor to each youth that could work with them outside the program and practice more. First of all, another thing is put in more practice sessions. That's an obvious one. And maybe increase the adults in the room that could go around and work with the students while they're and help them to practice more in the classroom setting. I mean, these are all kinds of things that if you worked in a group with your other 4-H people, that you could come up with these implications and recommendations, and then structure your program or improve your program because of this one little piece of data that you had. So the next thing I just want you to be able to do within your groups is to write a little impact statement. Because if you are able to concise this down to a couple of 3 paragraphs, your communication people, so Stacy's here from the communication department. I can put her on the spot. If your programs throughout Extension were able to do really good impact statements in a concise way and that clear, would that help you in your work in terms of communicating?
Oh, definitely. We love those.
Yeah. So if you talk to evaluators in Extension, they'll all tell you that it's hard to work with the communications people because we're into data, and they're into stories. If that's a simplistic way to say it, but it's hard for me. I'm not a storyteller, and so you have to have both probably. But the story should be backed up by some statistics and some data that really show that making a difference. So at the end of my career, I did a workshop with somebody from communications about he did it on Qualtrics, and I did it on, because he was really good with the Qualtrics system, and I did it on how to write a questionnaire. And I thought, man, why didn't I do this sooner? This is really a good combination. So look for ways to network with other people in your universities, not just in extension, but that have the skills that you maybe lack, and it's really a worthwhile thing to do, just saying. So, impact statements. These are the three basic parts of an impact statement. What is the issue that you're addressing? What activities have you done, and what are the results? The problem with a lot of impact statements, they end with the activities. So they say if 400 people came to their training, they put that in the results section, and that's not really what we're looking. That's an activity output. It's good if you had 400 people coming to your training, but it's part of the activity. We held this training and 400 people came. But it's not the results. The results is what happened to those people in the training. What did they learn? What behaviors were changed by being in it? Did anything change in the community? I used to use a logic model that, any of you know Mary Arnold, because she's the 4-H evaluator at Oregon State. And Mary had her logic models. I loved her illustrations, and she had some kind of I think it might have been a environmental program in the schools, but she ended up in her last category of conditional change. She had that program was adapted by the school, and they built a whole room of environmental science or whatever, and all came out of the 4-H program, and that's a real conditional change. Sometimes we think we have to report world peace in the conditional part. Most of us can't measure that, and anyway, but these divisions are arbitrary to some extent, but the idea is that something changed beyond the individual. Something changed in the community, in the school, in wherever it's being held, and that's a really important thing to be able to report. As you can see, it's the last thing I had on there. So I'm going to give you example not because this is great, but because I was trying to do, I didn't have as good, I looked back at federal reports, and I didn't have really great impact statements in 4-H, unfortunately. So this is actually similar to the one group, might be the same data. But this is one that I took out of a federal report. And so the issue was, and the federal report forced you under issue to have, I know this very well, 8 to 10 lines. Section 2, what did we do, 8 to 10 lines. And Section 3, results 12 to 14 lines. So you were forced to say it very concisely, which is a good thing. So here we have one that says, in order to address the extreme problem of substance abuse in our state, most specifically opioid abuse, this project implemented an evidence-based program which has been proven to be effective in reducing the likelihood that youth will become involved over time in risky behaviors. What we did, youth in this program are enrolled in one or both of 2 activities, family-based learning with parents or guardians in the 6th grade and school-based life training in the 7th grade. This semester, 311 youth between the ages of 10 and 14 were enrolled. The students and families came from 2 counties. 2 family programs and 4 life skill programs were held. So there's the little bit about what we did. And the results were youth showed slight increases on decision-making, self-efficacy, problem-solving, and post-critical thinking measures. For critical thinking, the pre-assessment mean was 2.7 and the post 2.76, so very little change on the something's wrong there, on the making decision scales, and these were all scales that they used through the SCIFAR program. The pre-mean was 295 and the post-mean was 2.96. Something, I feel like something's missing there. But anyway, and then the next thing, on a family relationship questionnaire, we saw some improvement on indicators related to social conscience, personal values, and caring. For example, youth showed improvement in their response to one statement. I show my parents that I appreciate the things they do for me. And you can see the increase there. So I had to take what I had and try to do something with it that would show that there was some effect from this program. And so, but you can see how simple, how short it is. Stacy, in the next workshop, will show you how to illustrate things like that. So she could take your impact statement and visualize it into a graph or other visual that would communicate that information to the people out there. So when you picked your stakeholders earlier in the day, some stakeholders want a big, long report, and other stakeholders want a few pages, and some stakeholders only want stories, and other stakeholders only want to see everything visually, and it all depends on what people want. And if you get it wrong, they could not be interested in what you're presenting to them. So taking that stakeholder thing one step further, knowing your stakeholders and knowing what they want, because they don't all want the same thing. I taught a class in evaluation, and I had examples, and some of them were even like a postcard. Just send a postcard to in West Virginia, the kids write postcards to stakeholders while they're at camp. And on that postcard, you could have a little piece of data that shows how, the benefit of camp. And that would be one way to get your message out to, I can't remember Mariah's chart, but the people that don't, that are somewhat interested but don't want to know every detail about your evaluation. They just want to know that they're giving some money to 4-H and they know it works. And that's another link. The people who do development in extension are people that also are interested in your data. So don't forget those people too. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is just take the same scenario with your data. By now I probably told you a lot about what the program is, so just make up, just write a sentence about what the program is. Tell us what you did. You can make it. You can totally make it up. It doesn't matter. But just and then using your data, write what your findings are. You don't have to use your implications or your recommendations for this part of it. I just want to tell you that I have a really nice handout that I'll put up in the resource section after the workshop that was created by the University of New Hampshire. Is anybody here from New Hampshire? No. Okay, Lisa Townsend, who used to be at the University of New Hampshire, now is at the University of Vermont, but not with Extension. She designed a really nice handout on how to develop an impact statement with examples from Extension kinds of programs in it. And when I used to work with a committee called Measuring Excellence in Extension, that was, I don't know, I never learned all my Extension all those letter things within Extension. But anyway, it came out of the headquarters in Washington, now Kansas City, I guess. We developed that so that people would have some consistency in the impact statements that they were creating within Extension. So I'll get that to you, and I think it's a really helpful thing. And anything else that I can think of, I kind of wanted to come here and see what people were really interested in, and before putting just a whole bunch of stuff up there. So here we go. You can put recommendations into these longer narratives. And then you have your program directors, your supervisors, those program leaders, whatever. They can go through this and decide and talk about what kinds of things they really want to implement. And as a group, you can decide how the changes you might make. And I may ask some questions here. Should we continue to offer this program? Sometimes the answer is no. It's a hard thing to do. It's better not to leave it up to your administrator to say no. It's better to be proactive and say, we recommend that this program not exist anymore because there are other programs that might be better to meet this overall goal, and we should maybe try something else because we've collected this data, and like the group in the back, it doesn't seem to be working, at least on the measures that were used. Should we make changes? There might be small changes that could be made within the program, and we talked about that a little bit in terms of the group that did the qualitative study. They recommended some actual changes to the camp setting, to the camp curriculum, et cetera. Maybe we're not going to throw out all the camps, but we could make some changes even to the physical facility of the camps. Should we select or create a different program that addresses the same issue? There's often many programs available within the extension system and without that address the same goals and objectives, and maybe the one that you picked is not the best one for your setting, your team, and so there might be another program that you might try. I know this all conjures up expenses because some of these curriculums are incredibly expensive, so you can't always do it. I found that in my experience, we were creating curriculums all the time when there were other ones existed. So it's always better to do a lit review to see what's out there and whether there is a program that already exists that you can use. Evaluation plans. A lot of you felt that the evaluation that was done was not adequate in terms of what was collected or how it was analyzed. The measures that were used, those kind of things often should be changed. Sometimes when you're first initiating the program, you have a much more extensive evaluation than you do later on. You don't need to be collecting a huge amount of data continuously all the time, so you can make that a much shorter procedure once you feel like the program has been evaluated and is up and running. And I just want to mention that often the program should actually exist without an evaluation sometimes to get it up and running before you start evaluating. We all get grants and they all want evaluations immediately, but that's not always the best idea. Sometimes it just needs to be up and running, and then you should have in mind, you should have an evaluation plan, and that should be part of your plan, but your plan doesn't necessarily have to be that we start collecting data on day one. Or we collect process data at first, and then we collect the outcome data later on. I guess that's a better way to say it. A lot of institutions are trying to decide what their priority programs should be. They're trying to narrow them down to, they have a goal, objectives, and in my experience, there were so many little programs. When I would collect all the data for the federal report, I couldn't believe how many little programs were out there, and that they differed from year to year. I could show you year to year for a healthy eating program how many different ones were used, and nobody was following it. Pretty much the extension has a philosophy that people should be able to cater their programs to their community and to their clientele, and faculty and agents and whatever their titles are, educators should be able to determine what they need, and so there's not always coordination that goes on. So this kind of information can help the institution at large consider what their priority programs are and narrow it down. Sometimes there's a lot of hurt feelings and anger. I was telling some group over there that we did this program called the 5 Love Languages, and you might be familiar with it even from your churches, because it originated at Moody Bible Institute in Chicago. But we did some testing of that program. We got it published in the Journal of Human Sciences and Extension, and we showed some results from it. But our own administration at WVU hated the program. They thought it was pseudoscience. They just didn't respect it at all, but yet the communities loved it. They wanted it. They asked for it. We showed that what it changed was that it helped couples put themselves in the place of their spouse or partner and learn to give love in the way that person wanted it rather than the way they thought they should want to get it. So that's a small thing, but if everybody did that, you can imagine, that it would change relationships. So, but still, we couldn't convince anybody. So they don't even mention it. They don't even, most of the people that were on the article, it didn't even get mentioned in their letters. So it was a goofy thing, but that happens within extension. And so sometimes this will, if you can collect data, you have a better, you're in a better position to make a case for the program that you love.